A man who chooses to walk alone does so not because he is forced, nor because he is lonely. He is not running from the world, nor does he harbor hatred for society. Simply put, he has started to see the world more clearly. He has realized that life, with its noise, expectations, molds, and prejudices, no longer holds him back. He has stepped out of it, quietly but decisively, like someone waking up from a long dream. He is no longer pulled by the hands that try to shape him into a proper person, according to society's standards. He is no longer bound by the desire to be useful, acceptable, or fitting. He no longer feels the need to please anyone, nor does he feel compelled to explain himself. He walks because he has understood, though he cannot express it in words, that walking alone does not mean being isolated, but being free. Most people fear being alone, because when silence envelops them, all the suppressed thoughts emerge. Worries, doubts, cracks in the soul all suddenly become clear. People fear silence because it forces them to face themselves. They turn to noise, endless conversations, busy work, and continuous relationships, all just to fill the void and suppress what has never been healed. But the man is not afraid of this. He does not shy away from himself. Instead, he lets the silence unfold, stretching out like an endless road. He steps into it as though returning home, not in a hurry, not anxious, not resisting. And it is in this stillness that something strange begins to happen. Without being caught up in the noise, he begins to hear things he had missed before. The wind blowing through the trees, the rhythm of nature's breath, the graceful sway of shadows, and the steady flow of the river. Everything unfolds naturally, without force, without struggle. The wind does not ask where it will go. The trees do not resist when bent by the wind. The river does not need to know its destination. It just flows. And as he observes all of this, a profound understanding gradually arises within him. He begins to sense that he is not alone. He is not separated from the world, but rather he is merging with it in a way that is deeper than any social connection. In that moment, he realizes he is part of the whole, not as a separate entity, but as a breeze, a wave, a speck of dust in the vast universe. The man who walks alone does not do so because he wishes to distance himself from others, but because he is moving closer to the truth. No longer bound by judgment, no longer manipulated by the need for recognition, he walks not to escape, but to return to the deepest, most primal, free, and honest essence of himself. The modern world today seems to glorify noise. People talk endlessly, always having something to discuss, to share, to argue about. Yet in these conversations, few truly listen. They wait for their turn to speak. They want to be heard, acknowledged, agreed with, and when that doesn't happen, they easily feel lost. In that constant rush, the man chooses silence, not because he has nothing to say, but because he has come to understand the power of stillness. He was once part of those noisy conversations, unsolicited advice, unnecessary rebuttals, debates meant more to prove than to understand. He used to be exhausted from always needing to be right, from having to prove himself, from trying to be a version acceptable to others. But then he began to realize that many people aren't truly seeking truth. They're seeking comfort. They don't want to hear things that might force them to reflect. They don't explore to understand, but to reinforce their existing beliefs. And to him, that gradually became meaningless. He had once tried to help, to share, to empathize, until he discovered a simple but profound truth. You cannot heal someone who is not ready to look at their own wounds. You cannot wake someone pretending to sleep. Everyone must walk their own path, and he no longer wished to interfere in that journey. He chose silence, not because he gave up, but because he respected. In that silence, he discovered something magical. He began to hear his inner voice more clearly. No longer drowned out by outside noise, forgotten thoughts began to surface again. He realized how much of his life had been lived to please others, how much authenticity he had sacrificed just to be accepted, to avoid being ridiculed. Now, he no longer feels the need to say everything he thinks. He doesn't have to prove his worth with words. He understands that the deepest truths don't always need to be spoken. Sometimes they only need to be felt. And sometimes silence is the most honest answer. He starts to see others with gentler eyes. No more judgment, no more attempts to fix anyone, no more expectations for them to change. He understands that everyone is struggling in their own way, And sometimes the best way to walk with them is to stay silent. Not interfering, not speaking, just being present. His silence is not an empty space. It is a sacred one, where all excess is stripped away. It is where truth can appear untainted by opinions, prejudices, or expectations. In that stillness, he finds peace. A peace that doesn't come from the agreement of the outside world, but from a deep inner acceptance. And in that silence, he also realizes something. Not every question needs an answer, and not every conversation needs to begin. There are things that can only be understood when we are quiet enough to truly listen. As time passed, the man realized that the most profound changes in life rarely come from noisy upheavals, but rather from the quietest moments. Not when people are shouting, weeping, or struggling, but when everything has settled, when the mind stops resisting. That is when truth gently steps in. In those solitary afternoons, he would sit silently before the sunset, doing nothing at all. Not thinking about tasks to complete, not concerned about who might misunderstand him, not trying to become anything else, simply being. And strangely, in that state of presence, he felt life more vividly than ever before. No longer burdened by the need to assert himself, he became softer, but not weak. He came to understand that true strength does not lie in the loudest voice or in an unbreakable appearance. It lies in the ability to endure misunderstanding while remaining at peace. To know that it's okay if no one understands you, as long as you no longer betray yourself. He learned how to empathize without attachment, to love without possessing, to listen without needing to respond. Everyone he met, whether familiar or a stranger, became a mirror, reflecting different parts of himself. Some reminded him how harshly he once judged others. Some stirred old pains he thought had long been buried. And some, with just an honest glance, opened his heart wide. No longer driven by the desire to teach life's lessons, he chose instead to be a humble student of life. Each day, he observed the world with fresh eyes, as if it were his first time living. The trees, the wind, the sunlight, children playing, all became miracles. He no longer wished for the world to change, so he could be at peace. He changed the way he saw the world, and peace came naturally. From time to time, people still asked him, "Why are you so quiet? Don't you feel sad that no one understands you?" He would just smile. How could he explain to them that he didn't need to be understood in order to feel happy? That there are things more sacred than understanding, like unconditional acceptance. And before waiting for others to offer it, he had already given it to himself. He didn't reject life, nor did he hide from it. He simply chose to live more truthfully, more slowly, more gently. He no longer searched for answers outside, but turned inward to listen, where he found an old friend, a forgotten child, a soul always waiting to be embraced. And in that moment, when everything outside seemed to fall silent, he heard a whisper, "Welcome home." Since the day he chose to slow down, he began to see the world with different eyes. Things he once considered ordinary, even meaningless, now became nourishment for his soul. The sound of birds in the early morning was no longer just background noise, but a gentle symphony. The afternoon rains no longer made him frown, but felt like a tender embrace from the earth and sky. Life, though it promised him nothing more, kept offering small but fulfilling gifts. He stopped chasing the races he once thought were important. Recognition, fame, wealth, these had all been the goals of a determined man. But then he realized, some things, the more you chase, the further you stray from yourself. He began to value the simplicity of waking up without rushing, a humble meal eaten with mindfulness, a conversation without purpose, without calculation. No longer did he feel the need to fix anyone's life. Instead, he only wished to be someone who could be fully present for others, whether they were joyful or broken, strong or vulnerable. He understood that sometimes people don't need advice. They just need someone to sit beside them, without judgment, without imposition, simply to be there like a small, steady light. An old friend, after many years apart, came to him. This friend was going through a collapse, feeling lost, expecting perhaps some wise counsel from a seasoned soul. But instead of saying much, he offered a cup of tea and invited the friend to sit on the worn bamboo chair on his porch. They didn't speak for a long time. And in that silence, the friend began to cry. Not out of pain, but because for the first time they felt truly understood. not with words, but with the full presence of another human being. He gradually became a resting place for the weary, not because he had answers, but because he no longer wished to fix anyone. He allowed others to simply be themselves, broken, misaligned, and beautiful all at once. And that very act, so natural and gentle, began to heal him, not through effort, but through compassion. Not with logical reasons, but through quiet surrender. He came to understand that happiness isn't found in possessing something grand, but in the ability to sit still with oneself, even when nothing special is happening. To smile without needing a reason. To know that no matter how the world may spin, there is always a peaceful place within him waiting for his return. He was no longer the man the world once knew, but he was more himself than ever before. After all the upheavals, his life finally found its own rhythm. No longer were his days a race against time, no longer filled with dense plans or the ambition to achieve something grand. Now, each moment in his life passed as gently as a breath, unhurried, unforced, simply present. He began to grow vegetables, tending a small garden behind his house. Every early morning, when the sun still peeked through the bamboo grove, he stepped into the garden, his hands brushing the leaves still wet with night dew. He learned patience from the soil, for the earth never rushes and plants only grow when we stop urging them to bear fruit too soon. The rows of greens, the gourd trellises, a few wild flowers, all seemed to mirror the life within him. Simple, slow, yet full of vitality. Villagers grew used to the image of a quiet man living alone, often seen reading beneath the shade of a tree, occasionally smiling at children running past. He didn't try to be friendly, yet his peace carried a subtle power, one that made others feel at ease, simply by his presence. Though he lived in seclusion, those who found their way to him often carried unnamed burdens. A young woman uncertain about her career path, a middle-aged man grieving a lost loved one, an elderly person living alone at the end of the village. They came not to be healed, but simply to sit beside someone who didn't need to say much. He no longer believed in quick fixes for deep wounds. He understood that people only truly change when they walk through the dark corners of their soul on their own. And sometimes all they need is a small, warm light to keep hope alive. Gradually, people began calling him the Keeper of the Flame. Not a flame of passion or fervor, but a quiet fire of awareness. This fire didn't blaze, but glowed steadily, warm enough to comfort a cold soul, bright enough to guide someone stumbling in the dark. One afternoon, a neighbor boy ran up to him and asked, "When I grow up, I want to be like you. But what kind of person are you?" He laughed, ruffled the boy's hair, and said, "I used to ask myself that too, and only much later did I understand. You don't have to become anyone. Just live kindly with yourself and with others, and that's enough." The answer wasn't philosophical, yet the children seemed to understand, because they kept running, laughing, leaving him with the cool afternoon sky and a heart full of gratitude. For in the end, perhaps the most precious thing in life isn't the achievements we carry, but the peace we leave in others' hearts. And so he lived, like a quiet stream flowing through life, needing no name, yet always present, gentle and complete. Time passed in silence, like a wordless melody in which every note was the breath of the earth and sky. He continued living a simple life in the peaceful countryside, where every morning began with the sound of birds chirping, the breeze rustling through the trees, and the scent of wild grass mingling with the early sunlight. These things, seemingly small, were the miracles that nourished his soul each day. Though he chose to live alone, he never felt lonely. On the contrary, in that very stillness, he rediscovered a deep connection with himself and the life around him. He began to write, not to publish or be recognized, but as a way to have a conversation with himself, to distill thoughts and feelings that had long been buried beneath the dust of time. His writing was as gentle as a whisper, not trying to teach anything, simply telling stories he had lived through, feelings from the heart. Sometimes, he printed a few of his writings, folded them into envelopes, and placed them by the front gate so that anyone passing by could take one if curious. He left no name, no message, just words written with all his sincerity. Strangely, those letters gradually began to be shared among the villagers like invisible gifts. Some read them and folded them carefully to place on their family altars as a quiet reminder, while others carried them in their shirt pockets as a silent comfort. He never asked what people thought of them, nor did he hope to be thanked. For him, sharing something heartfelt was enough. And perhaps that very selflessness gave those small pages a gentle weight, like a hand placed on the shoulder of someone weary. One rainy day, someone knocked on his door. It was a middle-aged woman, her eyes filled with sadness. She said she had read one of the anonymous letters, and that it gave her the courage to return after many years away. She had once lived a wild youth in that village, had left behind loved ones because of a wrong decision. Now she came back not to reclaim the past, but to say she was sorry. He didn't say much, just made tea and sat with her, watching the rain fall outside the porch. That silence, for her, perhaps meant more than 1,000 words of comfort. He realized that when people are able to lay down the burdens in their hearts, even a rainy day can become a moment of ease. The world outside continued to turn, full of people rushing to chase something grand. But for him, happiness was no longer a destination. It was each step, each glance, each moment spent truly listening to someone with his whole heart. He was no longer young, but not yet old. And in that in-between, he understood. To live one day fully was enough. There was no need to shine brightly, just to be a gentle light in someone's life, quiet but never fading. His life, though it passed in silence, carried a miraculous strength that few could recognize. He needed no proof of anything, no clear reason to exist. Everything he did was simple and natural, like a river flowing through the fields. Unhurried, unforced, yet always reaching the sea. He had come to understand that life doesn't always need a goal or a specific destination. Sometimes the calmness and peace found in the act of living itself are what matter most. He was not someone who ran away from the world, nor was he trying to detach himself from the community. On the contrary, he still lived among people, still shared space, but he refused to be swept up by the demands and expectations of society. He was simply a part of life, not participating in the noisy games this world creates, yet still whole within himself. He realized that the loneliness people often fear is not a lack of others, but a lack within. When you're constantly seeking validation from outside, always trying to build a version of yourself that society approves of, you'll always feel like something's missing, something truly important. But when you understand that you are enough as you are, when you no longer need to do anything to please others, you begin to see that you have always been complete. He knew that the world constantly pushes us into cycles of judgment, of comparison, endlessly urging us to chase unattainable goals. But he refused to join that game. He understood that peace and freedom come from letting go of the need to win, the need to prove something. Each day, he walked without needing anyone's recognition, without needing to be understood. He didn't wait for applause, didn't desire agreement from anyone. And in that, he discovered a kind of invisible strength. Not the strength of power or influence, but the strength of inner freedom. He was not afraid of loneliness, not afraid of being different, because he had found something more important than all of that: peace within his own soul. He didn't need to prove anything, nor did he need a reason to live. He lived simply because he was himself, and that was reason enough. He didn't judge the world, nor did he try to change it. He simply walked through it, and in every step he realized one truth: nothing is truly more important than knowing how to live honestly with yourself. Sometimes the fleeting encounters, the simple greetings, or the smiles of those around him became the precious moments in which he felt true connection. But he didn't need to hold on to them, didn't need to cling to anyone. He understood that life is a series of meetings and partings, and all he needed to do was live fully in each passing moment. He walked not toward some distant goal, but because each step was part of the journey. Each day that passed, he found himself growing stronger. Not because he conquered someone or achieved something grand, but because he had mastered himself. He no longer chased illusions, no longer let society's demands control him. All he needed was to be himself, and in that freedom, he found a strength and peace that few ever know. He lived in silence, but it wasn't a life of isolation. He never felt lonely, because he knew that loneliness only arises when we are not with ourselves. When you truly know who you are, you don't need to look elsewhere to feel whole. He walks not for a specific goal, not with haste or urgency, for he has come to understand that what matters is not the destination, but the journey itself. In this chaotic and overwhelming world, many feel the need to race, to accomplish something in order to prove their worth, to avoid feeling left behind. But he, a man who always chooses to walk alone, finds peace in that very stillness. He knows that only when the pressures of society and others are gone, when there's no longer a need to rush, can one truly feel every moment of life. He no longer seeks validation from anyone, no longer needs to be seen a certain way. He has let go of living according to others' expectations or views. He doesn't care what society thinks of him, whether others approve of him or not. Those things are now only temporary distractions, no longer of any real importance. He has discovered a quiet strength in the simplicity and freedom of being himself. He lives for himself, for what he feels and perceives from the world around him, not for the standards or goals set by others. He no longer needs to compete, no longer feels the urge to prove himself, because he has realized that life isn't always a race. Life isn't a sequence of wins or losses, but a process of self-discovery, of learning who you are in every passing second. He knows that loneliness is not a curse, but sometimes a chance to find oneself. He is not running away from the world, nor is he avoiding hardship or challenge. He simply refuses to be caught up in their whirlwind. He doesn't need to prove himself to anyone, because he understands that peace doesn't come from external recognition, it comes from understanding and harmony with one's own self. He lives with a freedom few ever attain, for he has given up the things society deems important: recognition, reputation, power, or what's considered success. He has come to see that all of these are fleeting, never truly guaranteed. That's why he never allows himself to be swept up by them. He understands that real peace only comes when you pause and realize you are lacking nothing, that you are already whole as you are. His steps are not a form of escape, but a natural motion, effortless, without purpose. He doesn't rush forward, doesn't chase a destination. Each of his steps is an expression of inner peace, a connection with himself and the world around him. He doesn't need to explain or justify anything, because he has learned that life does not require explanations. It simply is, and he has accepted everything that comes and goes. He does not find loneliness frightening. In fact, within that solitude, he discovers freedom. No one can control him. No one can force him to follow a path they believe is right. He walks his own path, not to make a statement, but simply to be true to himself. And in that freedom, he has found true strength, the strength of independence and self-mastery. His life is a journey with no stopping point, no ending, and no clear destination. He lives with the understanding that every step, every moment is a part of life itself. And what matters most is not where he's going, but how he lives, how he experiences life in each present moment. He understands that true freedom is not something easily attained in life. It is not about doing whatever one wants without interference, nor is it freedom from responsibility. True freedom is the liberation from everything others expect, the release from the standards that society has imposed on us. It is the freedom of not needing to pursue any goal beyond being oneself. He does not need recognition, does not seek validation from others, does not care to be known or acknowledged in the eyes of the world. He only needs to be himself, no longer burdened by anyone's expectations. He lives in silence, not because it is the easier path, but because it is the only way he can truly perceive and understand everything around him. In that silence, he no longer chases empty words, external calls, advice, or definitions others try to impose. He has learned to live simply, to let go of unnecessary complexity, and to focus only on what truly matters to him. With no more distractions, he begins to sense more clearly who he is and how the world feels. He realizes that when we let go of greed, anticipation, and expectation, we become more complete. Everything in life moves at its own rhythm, and he understands he doesn't need to follow any rhythm but his own. There is no need to rush or push forward, because he knows that everything will arrive when the time is right, not before and not by forcing it to happen. He no longer fears loneliness. In fact, he has embraced it as a part of himself, an inseparable part of this life. He doesn't run from it or try to fill every quiet moment. It is in those moments of solitude that he has found real strength, not in resistance or fear, but in deep understanding of himself. He no longer chases after the noise of life, the parties, or the meaningless conversations. He finds peace in simply being, without needing to prove or display anything. Everything he once sought, success, relationships, material things, has lost its importance. He understands now that all things in life are temporary. Success is a shifting idea. Relationships may come and go, and material possessions are only fleeting ownerships. He no longer clings to them because he has found fullness within himself. He no longer chases illusions of happiness because he has realized that happiness does not come from outside, but from acceptance and self-love. He walks a path without external validation, and that gives him a strength no one can take away. This strength does not come from mastering others or controlling circumstances, but from having learned to let go of what doesn't matter, to live by his own rhythm, and to welcome everything with a calm mind. He doesn't need to change anyone, doesn't need to show or explain anything. He lives with lightness of heart, no longer needing to struggle, no longer racing against time or society. Each step he takes is not to escape something, but to move into a space free from pressure. Every step is a journey of self-discovery, a deep integration with what truly matters. He no longer worries about reaching some grand goal. In truth, there is no final destination on his path. Every step is the destination, and he understands that life is not a race. To him, freedom is not about doing whatever one wants without consequence, but about not being bound by societal standards, not being controlled by others' judgments. He lives in a space of quiet, but within it there is fullness of life, freedom, and truth. And that is why he walks alone, to live honestly with himself, without needing to prove anything, without needing to fulfill anyone's expectations. He knows that freedom is not loneliness, but connection, with oneself and with the world, in a way no one else can define for him. He does not seek recognition from the outside world. He has learned that praise or acknowledgement from others is only temporary and cannot bring him true peace. While the world around him continues to chase fame and power, he realizes those things are not the ultimate goals in life. He no longer dreams of being remembered, acknowledged, or leaving a mark in history. Those things are merely constructs of illusion that people create to feel more important in the eyes of others. He lives a simple life, not clinging to titles or achievements. He doesn't need a dazzling life to prove his worth. To him, each step is not about reaching a final destination, but about living fully in each moment. Every day, every second holds value, and he embraces them without worrying about what he might achieve in the future. He is not afraid of time's changes because he understands that life is a continuous flow of transformation, and within that change, he finds joy. He no longer needs to hide himself or wear a mask to fit society's expectations. He accepts every part of who he is, his flaws, failures, and mistakes. He isn't afraid to face himself. In fact, he feels free when he is truly himself, not relying on others' judgment to define his value. He does not feel the need to explain why he chose a different path, because he knows it is his own choice, and that is what makes him proud. He understands that life is not a race and that there is no need to move fast to reach a goal. Every step has its own meaning, and he feels no urgency. He does not seek perfection, but finds peace in simple things. He does not chase success, but instead gains something far more meaningful: a deep understanding of himself and a connection with the world that does not require validation. He does not feel lacking by living alone. In truth, he feels stronger than ever in that solitude, for it is in those moments he can truly listen to himself and discover inner strength. He doesn't need others to feel whole, because he knows that fullness already exists within him. He no longer yearns for acceptance or love from the outside, but finds both within his own heart. The world may label him as an outcast, a loner, or someone unwilling to blend in, but he doesn't care about those labels. He is simply a person living his life in the way that feels right to him. He doesn't feel lonely because he knows he understands himself deeply, and within that understanding, he feels a profound connection with the universe. He doesn't need the presence of others to feel alive. He feels life in every breath, in every movement of the world around him. He is not someone who opposes society or its norms, but someone who lives by his own way, unaffected by external judgment. He has gone beyond the limits of both himself and society, and on that journey, he has found a strength that cannot be taken away. It is the strength of freedom, not the freedom to do anything he wants, but the freedom to live truthfully, unbound by anything he does not believe in. And in the end, he realizes that there is no wrong path, only paths that are not his own. He walks the path of freedom, not to escape anything, but to return to himself. That path has no destination, for every step is already a destination. Living this way, he not only finds peace within his soul, but becomes an inspiration for others to find their own freedom in life.